There's a house in Slaughter, Louisiana that first responders still struggle to talk about. What they found inside on January 3rd, 2022 was not the result of a stranger, a weapon, or a break-in. The people responsible lived there, both of them, and they were among the most respected members of their community. This is the story of Lacey Fletcher. Slaughter, Louisiana, population hovering around 1,000 people. It's a place where everyone knows whose truck is parked in whose driveway. And that's not gossip, that's just a Tuesday. Small towns like this run on reputation in a way that a city with 1 million people could never. Your name carries weight out there. The life you project to your neighbors becomes a form of social currency. And the general unspoken agreement among decent people is that you don't go digging in someone else's business as long as they're conducting themselves appropriately in public. The Fletcher family had spent years building a name that carried a significant amount of that weight. Sheila Fletcher worked as a clerk for the local court system and served as a town alderman. Clay, her husband, was equally embedded in the fabric of the community, serving as an officer in the Baton Rouge Civil War Roundtable, volunteering his time to document and preserve history. Neighbors described him as friendly, always visible in the front yard or at community gatherings. By every observable measure, these were upstanding people, and Slaughter saw no reason to think otherwise. Their daughter, Lacey Ellen Fletcher, was born on November 25, 1985. Her childhood was unremarkable in the best way possible. She went to school, she played volleyball, and the people who knew her described her as sweet and kind. There was nothing about her early life that announced what was coming. Around 16, Lacey began struggling in ways her family struggled to address. She developed severe social anxiety and was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a neurodevelopmental disorder on the autism spectrum. A diagnosis like that, in the right environment with the right support, is entirely workable. People with Asperger's lead full, independent, connected lives all the time. Lacey's anxiety was real and significant, and the decisions her parents made in response to it over the following years would redirect the entire course of her life. By 2002, Lacey was 16 years old, and she had her last documented appointment with a medical professional. After that visit, Sheila and Clay moved her to homeschooling. Whatever the reasoning at the time, that decision fundamentally severed the last remaining connection between Lacey and any outside oversight. No more teachers, no more coaches, no more mandated reporters with a legal obligation to speak up if something seemed off or wrong. After 2002, the only people responsible for Lacey's well-being were her parents, and her access to the outside world began narrowing in a way that nobody from the outside was positioned to see or stop. Her world contracted year by year. Slaughter became just the Fletcher household for her. The Fletcher house became mostly just the living room. The living room eventually became a single leather couch, and that couch became the entirety of Lacey Fletcher's existence for more than a decade. Behavioral experts who have studied this case reference something called the boiling frog phenomenon in caregiving situations. The changes come so incrementally that no single moment presents itself as a crisis demanding action. In 2003, Lacey was a teenager who didn't want to go out. By 2010, she was a young woman who preferred to stay in. By 2015, she had not left the couch in years. And by then, the Fletchers had likely normalized every stage of her decline because they had been present for every small step along the way. Researchers also point to a concept known as folie à deux. Now, I don't speak French. Maybe you do, but in case you're like me and do not speak French, I looked it up for both of us. It's a shared psychological state between two people who reinforce each other's belief that a deteriorating situation is under control. Folie à deux. Both frameworks appear to directly apply to the Fletcher household, and together they go some distance toward explaining how two seemingly rational adults could coexist with what was developing in their living room. Psychology can describe the mechanism. It offers no comfort whatsoever on the question of why they never tried to stop it. Responding to a call from the residents, first responders arrived at the house on Highway 964 on January 3, 2022. Lacey Fletcher was found seated on a leather couch. She weighed 96 pounds. Her body was covered in stage 4 pressure ulcers, wounds so advanced that bone was exposed in multiple areas. She was covered in fecal matter found in her hair, her ears, and under her fingernails. There was an active maggot infestation in her open wounds. She also, by the way, tested positive for COVID-19, which almost certainly delivered the final blow to a body already compromised beyond recovery. The couch itself held a complete record of what had been happening there for years. Sheila and Clay had called it Lacey's Sanctuary, a place she had chosen. What the forensic evidence showed was a woman left to disappear. Lacey had remained in the same position for so long that her body wore a cavity through the leather and foam cushioning all the way to the floor beneath it. The leather had been chemically dissolved by years of exposure. The hollow beneath her held accumulated biological waste that had saturated into the flooring. Dr. Bickham, the East Feliciana Parish coroner, had spent decades in this profession. He described what he saw as the worst of his career and called Lacey's death murder by neglect. The official cause was sepsis, a systemic infection originating from those stage 4 ulcers that had gone completely untreated. Her weight at death confirmed years of malnutrition. What's genuinely hard to absorb about this case is that Sheila and Clay were living entirely normal on the other side of the house, eating meals in the kitchen, sleeping in their beds, traveling, attending social events. Clay was out doing yard work and chatting with the neighbors. Sheila was driving to her job in the legal system of East Feliciana Parish and then coming home. They had functionally partitioned off one section of their home and one section of their minds. And within this partition, a human being was dying. Researchers use the term high-functioning disassociation to describe the capacity to seal off a horrifying reality while operating completely normally everywhere else. Their neighbors had not seen Lacey in approximately 15 years. When they got asked about her, they offered vague reassurances. She's doing okay. She's still struggling a little. Because the Fletchers were trusted, well-regarded people, nobody pushed further and nobody called for a welfare check. This case has become one of the most widely cited examples in a national conversation about vulnerable adult protections. Children have layers of mandatory oversight surrounding them, teachers and coaches and pediatricians, with legal obligations to act if they see something wrong. Adults with developmental disabilities living under the sole care of family frequently have no equivalent system. Lacey Fletcher fell through every gap that existed. In May 2022, a grand jury returned a second-degree murder indictment against both Clay and Sheila Fletcher in under 2 hours. Sheila resigned from her alderman position shortly after. Those indictments were tossed in 2023 on technicalities related to statutory language, producing a wave of public outrage, and a second grand jury returned the same charges. In February 2024, both Fletchers entered a no-contest plea to the reduced charge of manslaughter, which carries identical legal weight to a guilty plea while allowing defendants to avoid saying the words directly. Each received a 40-year sentence with 20 years suspended, meaning each will serve 20 years followed by 5 years of supervised probation. A lot of people following this case sat with the math for a while. Prosecuting neglect is genuinely difficult because the crime lives in 2 decades of consistent inaction rather than a single identifiable event, and manslaughter is often the most realistic charge prosecutors can actually secure. The law has real limits in these situations, and that awareness does not make the number feel adequate. In the aftermath of this case, advocates began pushing for legislation, informally they're calling it Lacey's Law, which would require periodic welfare checks or medical attestations for disabled adults living solely under the care of family members. A framework designed to bridge the gap between protections extended to children and the relative invisibility of disabled adults in the current system. That conversation is still ongoing. Lacey Fletcher played volleyball, had friends. She was described as sweet and kind. She had a diagnosis that came with real challenges, and the people who were supposed to walk through those challenges alongside her chose their reputation and their own lives above hers for 20 years in a living room where the television was probably still on. The very least we can do now is say her name and mean it. Thanks for listening to 10 Minute Murder, bingeable true crime stories. My name is Joe. Hi, I'm the host. And here's an email. Subject: do you ever scrap episodes? Hi, Joe. Have you ever researched a case and decided not to release the episode, either because it didn't sit right or it just didn't come together the way that you wanted? I imagine this has to happen sometimes. Trent in Missoula, Montana. Trent, bingo, brother, you got it. It does happen. Unfortunately. It feels like a waste of time every time I do it, and in the end, I would feel weird if I just started putting out episodes just because I did the work on the front end, if that makes any sense. I can't justify, well, I did so much research on this, I just might as well release it. I wouldn't feel right about that. If at any point I think I'm not telling this story appropriately, I'm not being as respectful about the victims as I should be, I don't think there's a way for me to tell this story in 10 minutes and it be respectful to what the situation was, then I just don't. And it doesn't matter how much time I spent in researching the case. Again, thank you for the email. Hey, if you're a new listener to this podcast, welcome. Let me be the first one to say, sit down, put your feet up, have a cool beverage if you want to, but make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. That's going to more easily help you come back and find the podcast. You don't have to go, what was that podcast with the weird guy that he says strange things and it's like 10 minutes long? If you just subscribe to the podcast, you don't have to go searching for it every single time you want to listen. Also, when you're subscribed, you can more easily go back and find previous episodes of the podcast. And there are hundreds and hundreds of those. And this goes to everyone, whether you're an OG listener or this is the first episode you've ever listened to. If you're into true crime podcasts and you like what I'm doing over here, you can listen to my other podcast. It's a longer format true crime podcast. It's called True Crime Blueprint. I'd be thrilled if you went and checked that one out. Let me know what you think. If you like it, subscribe over there as well. True Crime Blueprint. And that's going to do it. That's your episode for today. Thank you again for listening to 10 Minute Murder. See you next time.